Well, my guest today was one of the first female editors of a national newspaper in the UK, earning her the nickname the First Lady of Fleet Street. She's interviewed everyone from royalty to prime ministers, but today the tables have turned and she's going to be the one answering the questions. I am so thrilled to bits, I can't tell you, to be joined by the exceptional Eve Pollard.
Hello.
Hello,
How are
lovely
you?
to see you.
Nice to see you.
Do sit yourself down
I will.
on my beautiful white pink sofa.
Yes, I love the garden view you have here.
Isn't it
really
lovely?
Nice.
And lovely for the time of year.
Yeah.
So it's great to have you here. When people describe you as the Queen of Fleet Street, the First Lady of Fleet Street, do you feel that that's an accurate description of what you did and what you were?
Well, there were two or three of us, but I was the second one. A great friend of mine was the first one, so I always give her the bow. But it was very hard. I mean, and they never gave women the successful newspapers. They gave you the ones that were in trouble, see if you could get them out. But we're lucky. I added a magazine to the Sunday Mirror when I first started. And we did change Fleet Street quite a lot. But then, sadly, Fleet Street's changing quite a lot now because you get your news on your telephone and not so many people are reading them. Yet it's really important. People do, because they discover what's going on in Ukraine, Uganda, Gaza, Israel, New York, Washington. I mean, it's really important.
Sometimes people find it absolutely and utterly overwhelming. You know,
think that's true.
When the Prime Minister says the whole world is changing on its axis, you think, oh, my God, you know, what am I meant to do about it? How am I meant to respond about it? Everything's changing. I don't know what to do or how to react. But you began as a tea girl.
Not quite. I began as... I started working for a publisher, and I was allowed to write those blurbs for the very simple books. And then I met somebody. I then went to work for Simpson's Piccadilly, which was a huge store, and it's now a big bookshop. And I worked for an American, and she taught me about how much you need to write around a store, menus in the restaurant, everything. And I met all these girls doing this brilliant job, which was writing about fashion for a fashion magazine. And I thought, that's what I want to do. So I heard about a job, and I worked for a woman called Audrey Slaughter, who was a genius. And I did a spread, and she liked the spread because at the bottom I said, if you're in Leeds, you can go to this shop and you'll get this dress.
Yes.
If you're in Manchester, she thought I had a view. And then I was off.
And to describe what the fashion was like at that time.
Well, first of all, there was not much fashion. It was just before Bieber really got underway. So there wasn't much fashion for young people. And young people, you know, we used to paint shoes because we thought they would buy Anello and David shoes, which were for dancing, and for some reason cheaper than shoes in the shops. There wasn't a lot of choice. You know, you had to make it. And there were still huge stores like Dickens and Jones and places where your mother felt comfortable and you didn't. And, of course, it's now completely changed. Everything's for young people. Very hard, if I may say, to find a T-shirt that's got a longer sleeve, because I now need a longer sleeve, because the arms just go.
But how do you get from the person that writes the blurb, the person who's, you know, doing whatever Audrey Slaughter tells her to do about fashion, to Eve Pollard, OBE, Queen of Fleet Street?
Well,
how do you convince them that
work.
you must be taken seriously, that you have the acumen, that you have the overview, leadership qualities, when actually nobody's looking for that in a woman at that time?
Nobody was looking for that in a woman, absolutely right. But what happened was I then ended up as the woman's editor of the Sunday Mirror. I was pregnant with Claudia at the time. I got pregnant when I was working on The Observer. And there was nothing written down about how much pregnancy leave you had. There was nothing. So I went to see the editor at The Observer, and he said, don't worry, it'll be fine, we'll work something out. And then a woman called Felicity Green heard about me and knew me because I'd worked a bit for her on The Mirror. And she said, I think you should go and see Mike Christensen, son of the famous Arthur Christensen. He's looking for a woman's editor.
Yeah.
So we met in a dark wine cellar off Fleet Street. I was very glad because my tummy was starting to emerge. And I said to him, you do know I'm pregnant? And he said, yes, I don't think there's ever been a woman's editor in Fleet Street who's had a baby before. We think it'll be interesting. And when I got there, it was a really interesting job because the royals became more fashion conscious. So I started doing royal coverage. I started doing extra coverage. We did lots of investigations. They were trying to sell women a shield, you know, used to insert.
A contraceptive shield, yeah.
Contraceptive shield, exactly right. And they'd stopped it in America, but they were still selling it here. We discovered they stopped it in America because it harmed women. so we could have a real go at strong stories.
Talk to me about what it meant to be a women's editor, because in those days, I mean, I was often told, you know, run along and don't bother your little head about this, that and the other.
Yeah.
It was thought that women had women's concerns.
Correct.
Women were only interested in frilly nonsense, in
Yes.
what you wore,
Yes.
presents.
Yes.
I mean, I don't
Christmas,
know, you know, hair
cooking.
care, whatever
Yes.
it is. Were you fighting against that? Were you
All the
trying to
time.
say we're human, we're people, we're interested in everything, just
but
like everyone else?
All the time. And then, you know, there would be a story about a war going on somewhere. And you knew that, of course, the people who were doing worst out of it were the women and children. And say, why do we never interview a woman in this situation? We're in Africa here.
Yeah.
There are women are starving, struggling. They have several children. And eventually, people did listen. And of course, there were some brilliant people I worked for. I worked for Rupert Murdoch, who understood women, who quite likes women. And he was great. I launched Elle for him in New York. Slowly it changed. And of course, women would go down to the newsagent and they would pay the bill. And if the paper wasn't the paper they liked, they might change it. There was a nice magazine, another paper, and magazines were just starting to be given away for nothing. So they realised women were quite important. But it took a while.
It took a while, and you were there forging ahead,
Forging
trying to
ahead.
say, for God's sake, women have brains,
Yes.
thoughts, emotions, they care
And-
about
and
politics,
also
they care about everything.
It was good that I had a baby at that time
Yes.
because you learnt about schools, you learnt about teachers, you learnt about the problems you had getting to work for women who had to work. And of course, there weren't many single mothers, but it was just coming on the scene. You knew about those things.
We're going to talk about that baby a little bit later on, because your baby is now kind of world famous, Claudia Winkleman. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's get